$20 says the new girl doesn't last a week. These military types never adjust to real medicine. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 48 hours before a decorated Master Chief Petty Officer destroyed his entire career. St. Michael's Hospital in San Antonio hums with the fluorescent buzz of third shift. Antiseptic tang mixes with burnt coffee from the break room pot, that metallic bite of air that lives in every hospital corridor. The clock on the wall reads 5:27 a.m. Morning rounds haven't started yet. The staff is still scattered across the unit, some finishing charting, others preparing for the day crew that arrives in 13 minutes. Danielle Ross moves through the oncology wing with efficient silence, checking full lines with hands that never fumble. Her eyes scan vital monitors in patterns too systematic for civilian training. She's been at St. Michael's for 2 days. 48 hours of competent silence, of showing up early, of staying late, of being the kind of nurse who doesn't ask questions and doesn't draw attention. The kind of nurse people forget to watch. Her scrubs are standard issue, a navy blue, 2 sizes larger than necessary. The fit keeps people from noticing the lean muscle underneath, the kind of physiology that comes from 17 years of combat medicine in places civilians don't go. She wears her ID badge clipped to her pocket where the laminated photo shows a younger face, softer around the edges. The hair is longer in the picture. The eyes are different, they haven't seen Baghdad yet. But Danielle has seen Baghdad. She's seen it twice. She's seen it at night, under starlight, when IEDs lit up the Jolan district like fireworks. She's seen it in the daytime, in the summer heat that turns asphalt to liquid and blood to copper and plasma. In her locker, under the folded scrubs and the spare compression socks, sits a pair of combat boots. The leather is cracked from desert sand. The laces are frayed at the ends. There's a 3-inch scar in the left sole where shrapnel once punched through. She carries them because they remind her who she is when she's not pretending to be someone else. She carries them because headquarters said to keep one piece of her real identity close. A tether. A lifeline. A reminder that this cover story has an expiration date. Dr. Whitfield stands in the St. Michael's break room at 5:52 a.m., holding a stack of patient charts against his chest like armor. His suit costs more than most nurses make in a month. The fabric is Italian wool, cut to emphasize shoulders that have never done a day of physical work. His watch is a Rolex Submariner, the kind that costs more than a used car. His shoes are Oxfords polished to a mirror finish. He is gesturing with his free hand, pointing toward the oncology wing where Danielle is currently checking the flow rate on a septic patient in room 308. $20, Whitfield says, his voice carrying the kind of lazy confidence that comes from knowing the hospital board president is his golfing partner. $20 says the new girl doesn't last a week. These military types never adjust to real medicine. They come in all disciplined and organized, thinking they can run a civilian hospital like a barracks. No creativity. No flexibility. No understanding of how actual patients work. The junior residents laugh. It's the kind of laugh that only happens when someone with institutional power is mocking someone without it. The kind of laugh that ripples through hierarchies like a wave. Dr. Adrian Chen, the attending physician on the floor, doesn't laugh. He's studying his tablet, scrolling through overnight notes. His jaw is set in a way that suggests he's heard this speech before. Chen is the kind of doctor who still remembers why he became a physician, not for the status or the money, but because patients matter. He doesn't work well with Whitfield. She's competent, Chen says without looking up. I reviewed her notes from her first 2 shifts. Her charting is precise. Her clinical assessments are solid. The patient in 412 hasn't needed pain management intervention in 18 hours under her monitoring. Precise charting, Whitfield says, his smile sharpening. That's the problem, isn't it? Military minds. Everything by the book. Everything documented. No innovation. No understanding of the art of medicine. He sets the charts down on the break room table. The stack lands with a sharp slap against the laminate surface. Real nursing is about intuition, Whitfield continues. It's about reading between the lines, understanding what patients need beyond what the protocols say. Military training beats that out of you. Makes you into a robot. He walks toward the door, toward the oncology wing, toward the place where Danielle is currently documenting her morning assessments. What Whitfield doesn't know is that Danielle Ross wasn't hired by St. Michael's Hospital through any normal nursing recruitment process. She wasn't here because she needed a job or wanted to start fresh in San Antonio. She was here because Joint Special Operations Command had placed her at this hospital with a single mission: monitor Army Ranger Marcus Chen in room for 12. Marcus Chen's chart is marked as a routine post-operative recovery. Appendectomy. Clean surgery. No complications during the procedure. Insurance authorization came through without issue. His paperwork shows 12 years of Army service, medical discharge due to sustained injuries from multiple deployments. His address in Austin checks out. His family is verified. What doesn't check out are the insurance claims. $847,000 in charges for a procedure that should have cost $34,000. MRI imaging performed on equipment that doesn't exist in this hospital. Specialist consultations with physicians who left St. Michael's years ago. Lab work dated 3 days after Marcus Chen's admission, blood work from a man who was unconscious in recovery at the time those results were supposed to be generated. The Veteran Affairs Fraud Investigation Unit had flagged the pattern 6 months ago. When they dug deeper, they found it wasn't isolated to Marcus Chen. It was systematic. 37 veteran patients in the past 5 years. Military medical histories. Large insurance claims. One common thread connecting them all: Dr. Whitfield authorized the charges. Dr. Whitfield signed off on the procedures. Dr. Whitfield's signature was on every inflated bill that went to the insurance companies. That investigation had reached the desk of a 2-star general at JSOC who owed a favor to a hospital administrator in Austin. The administrator owed a favor to someone in the Pentagon. The Pentagon made a phone call to a recruiting coordinator at the Texas Board of Nursing. 2 weeks later, Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross was hired as a registered nurse at St. Michael's Hospital under her civilian alias. She has been here for 48 hours. She will be here until Marcus Chen is discharged or until she has gathered enough evidence to shut down the fraud ring Whitfield has built with his friends on the hospital board. Whichever comes second. Danielle is in room for 12 when Drive Whitfield walks past. She's standing beside Marcus Chen's bed, checking the peripheral line in his right arm. The fur is running clear, normal saline at a maintenance rate. The site is clean, no redness or swelling. His vitals are stable. Heart rate 78 and regular. Blood pressure 118/76. Oxygen saturation 98% on room air. Respiratory rate 16. Temperature 98.6. Marcus Chen's eyes are open. He's been awake for 6 hours. The post-operative pain is manageable with the medication schedule Danielle set up: acetaminophen every 6 hours, ibuprofen as needed for the breakthrough pain that comes when he shifts his weight or tries to walk to the bathroom. He watches Danielle work with the kind of attention that suggests he's noticing things. The way her hands move. The efficiency. The absence of wasted motion. The systematic approach to checking each component of his care. The way she adjusts the fall line without causing pain. The way her voice is quiet, measured, respectful. How's the pain level? Danielle asks him, and her voice is soft but clear. It's the voice of someone who has asked this question 10,000 times before. 3 out of 10, Marcus answers. Better than expected. Let me know if it gets above a 5. We can adjust the schedule. She makes a note in his chart. The notation is precise. Timestamp. Vital signs. Assessment. Plan. Everything documented in the style that hospitals teach now: objective, measurable, reproducible. Dr. Whitfield watches from the doorway for exactly 4 seconds. Then he moves on to the next room, to the next patient, to the next opportunity to assert his authority over someone who can't push back. But that wasn't the worst part of what Dr. Whitfield didn't know. He didn't know that Marcus Chen had spent 14 years in the army before the IED in Kandahar province shattered his left leg in 3 places. He didn't know that Marcus had been a combat medic before he made Ranger. He didn't know that Marcus Chen had spent enough time on forward operating bases to recognize military training when he saw it, to understand the precision and discipline that civilian nurses didn't carry. He didn't know that when Danielle Ross adjusted Marcus Chen's for line, when she moved through his room with that particular kind of efficient silence, when she checked his vital signs in that specific order, Marcus Chen had locked eyes with her for exactly 1 second, and in that 1 second, something passed between them. Recognition. Danielle turns to leave the room. She carries Marcus Chen's chart with her. The door slides closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. The sound of air escaping, the sound of hospital machinery breathing on its own rhythm, the sound of St. Michael's continuing to function the way it has functioned for 19 years. She doesn't know yet that Marcus Chen is still watching her through the small rectangular window in his door. She doesn't know that he's thinking about something. She doesn't know that he's about to do something that will change everything about her careful plan. But she will find out. 31 hours from now, everything will accelerate. By then, Whitfield will have moved to stage 2 of his institutional dominance. By then, Danielle will begin to understand the full scope of what is built and who is protected. By then, the tether will tighten, and the decision to stay hidden will become harder to justify. For now, though, at 6:03 a.m. on a Thursday morning in San Antonio, Danielle Ross walks back to the nurse's station and logs Marcus Chen's vitals into the computer system. The keyboard clicks under her fingers. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. The hospital breathes around her, machines breathing for patients, air systems breathing for the building, a living organism of tile and stainless steel and the weight of secrets. She has no idea what is waiting in room for 12. She has no idea that a single moment of recognition is about to unlock something that months of surveillance never could. She has no idea that by the end of this week, the question won't be whether she can maintain her cover story. The question will be whether her cover story is about to be destroyed by someone who might actually understand who she is. $20 as the new girl doesn't last a week. These military types never adjust to real medicine. Dr. Whitfield said it during morning rounds, his voice carrying across the break room like a tank idling in a garage, loud enough for 4 residents and 3 nurses to hear. His eyes found Danielle Ross as she poured coffee from the pot, waiting for her to flinch, to respond, to give him something to work with. Her jaw muscle flexed once. That was all. She continued pouring, hand steady as surgical steel, and walked past him without meeting his gaze. The coffee cup didn't rattle. Her voice didn't crack. She simply existed in the space he'd tried to occupy, and it infuriated him more than if she'd fought back. 2 days passed. Danielle moved through St. Michael's like water finding its level, learning the rhythms of the hospital, the patterns of the fraud that had brought her here. Her real assignment sat 3 floors up in the orthopedic wing, Army Ranger Marcus Chen, a patient whose insurance claims didn't match his injuries, whose medical trajectory suggested something deeper than a simple motorcycle accident. But first, she had to survive the man who saw her as a threat to his authority simply because she didn't acknowledge it. The cafeteria during lunch rush was chaos, trays clattering, voices overlapping, the smell of industrial disinfectant mixing with something that might have been chicken. Danielle sat at a corner table with 2 other nurses, reviewing her notes on Chen's file, when Whitfield walked past. His elbow caught her tray on purpose. The angle was too precise, the timing too deliberate. Orange juice spilled across her scrubs in a wave, salad scattered across the tile floor like shrapnel. Conversations paused. 3 tables stopped mid-sentence, watching to see what would happen. Clumsy, aren't we? Whitfield said loudly, already walking away as if the damage was inconsequential. Danielle stood slowly, grabbed napkins from the dispenser, crouched without hurrying. She collected each piece of lettuce, each crouton, moving with the methodical precision of someone who had cleaned far worse than spilled lunch in active combat zones. Her hands didn't shake. The other nurses watched her, waiting for some sign of distress, some crack in the surface. There was none. Her jaw muscles were the only part of her that moved visibly, a single sustained clench while she reassembled the tray and cleaned the floor. She disposed of the debris, changed her scrubs in the locker room in exactly 4 minutes, and returned to work as if the moment had never happened. But her hand, pressed flat against the cool metal of her locker before she closed the door, trembled for exactly 3 seconds before she forced it still. That afternoon, something worse. Whitfield was conducting rounds with 6 residents gathered in the hallway outside patient rooms, teaching them the hierarchy of medical knowledge like a god dispensing scripture from on high. Danielle was approaching with a patient chart from the previous night's assessments. He saw her coming. His smile was the smile of a man who had planned something. He took the chart from her hands and dropped it deliberately. Papers scattered across the hallway tile like a broken promise, pages sliding under gurneys and into corners, the documentation of a full night's care reduced to debris. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he drawled, his voice designed to carry, to make sure every resident heard the condescension, the dismissal, the category he was placing her into with 2 words. The residents shifted uncomfortably. One of them looked away. Whitfield turned to a second-year intern, a young man barely old enough to be trusted with a prescription pad, and began his lecture above Danielle's head as she crouched and began collecting each page methodically. "Nurses from lesser backgrounds need extra supervision," he said, his tone professorial, almost helpful. "You'll learn that soon enough. They come in thinking combat nursing translates to real medicine, but it doesn't. Different frameworks. Different standards. They need watching. Extra verification of credentials. Traditional nursing education teaches protocols that keep patients safe. Military training teaches improvisation. Improvisation kills people." The intern nodded, absorbing this lie like gospel, while Danielle reassembled the chart, its pages now out of order, her professional documentation reduced to a teaching moment about her own inadequacy. She stood, handed the chart back to Whitfield without meeting his eyes, and walked away. Her breathing was controlled. Her pace was measured. The trembling didn't start until she rounded the corner and was out of sight, her hand pressed flat against the cold cinder block wall for 3 seconds, 5, her whole body vibrating like a string pulled too tight. But that wasn't the worst part. She forced herself still, pressed her palm harder against the wall until the sensation grounded her, then continued to patient Chen's room. Her shift still had 6 hours. Her mission still required her to disappear into the role of a temporary nurse, someone forgettable, someone without history or importance. She opened Chen's chart and began the work that had actually brought her here, cross-referencing his treatment codes against his actual medical procedures. What she found made her blood go cold. The bypass surgery he'd supposedly had was coded as a full cardiothoracic replacement. His medication regimen showed prescriptions for immunosuppressants he wasn't receiving. His discharge diagnoses included complications that had never appeared in his actual medical record. The billing codes climbed higher and higher. A man whose injuries warranted maybe $40,000 in care was being billed for $320,000. And Whitfield's signature appeared on every inflated code, every fraudulent assessment, every document that elevated a legitimate injury into something catastrophic enough to justify money moving through the system in ways that left no fingerprints. She was still reviewing the documentation, her mind cataloging the evidence, when the code blue alarm sounded from the post-surgical wing. The sound cut through the hospital like a knife, sharp, electric, immediate. Danielle was moving before conscious thought could catch up, muscle memory from 17 years of military trauma medicine overriding civilian protocols. 2 a.m. in Baghdad operated on the same urgency as 2 a.m. in San Antonio. Crisis had a rhythm that transcended geography. Room 307. Post-operative cardiac patient. 72 hours out from bypass surgery. She arrived before the crash cart, found him grey-faced and drowning in his own blood pressure, jugular veins distended like rope. Cardiac tamponade. Fluid accumulating in the pericardial sac, compressing his heart, suffocating the organ from the outside in. The attending resident stood frozen, staring at the monitor as if the numbers might change if he looked hard enough. "We need to wait for the surgeon," the resident stammered. Danielle was already moving, hand steady as stone, reaching for the ultrasound probe. He'll be dead. She had done this procedure in conditions that made this sterile American hallway look like a five-star resort. She had done it in a sandstorm outside Fallujah with nothing but a field kit and moonlight. She had done it under mortar fire in a shipping container hospital in Kandahar, in conditions where every second mattered because there were 40 more casualties waiting and only 2 medics. Her hands found the space between his ribs, the third and fourth intercostal space, midclavicular line. The technique was muscle memory from 1,000 training repetitions and 400 real-world applications. 18 seconds. The needle went in. The sinus rhythm climbed. Harrison's pressure stabilized. The surgeon arrived 11 minutes later to find his patient stable, blood pressure recovering, Danielle documenting the procedure with clinical precision. The chart notation was flawless, factual, professional. No drama. No self-congratulation. Just the clinical recording of an intervention that had kept a man alive. The surgeon's shocked stare lasted for 3 seconds before he managed words. "Did you?" "I've done it before," Danielle said quietly, and turned back to her work. What she didn't see, Army Ranger Marcus Chen in the doorway of his room across the hallway, watching her in his hospital gown, his eyes tracking the precision of her movements, the angle of her hands, the way her body moved through space like someone who had already survived the worst. He had seen combat medics work. He had watched them save his platoon in the mountains of Baghdad, under fire, with equipment held together by duct tape and determination. He recognized the signature in her hands. Later, during his routine suturing procedure, a revision of his surgical site, Chen studied the way she tied the closing knot. Not the standard four-square technique taught in civilian nursing programs. A specific three-finger twist, a method that reduced the risk of tissue trauma in field conditions, a technique taught only to military corpsmen operating in austere environments where infection rates climbed and perfection mattered. "You tied that exactly like the combat medic who saved my platoon in Baghdad," he whispered, his voice careful, testing the waters. "Same technique. Same hands." Her hand paused. The needle hung suspended in space for a fraction of a second, hovering above the closing incision. For one breath, too, she existed in that frozen moment where her cover and her identity occupied the same airspace. Then she continued working, steady as before, closing the suture with the precision that came from keeping people alive when everything else was falling apart. Her voice, when she spoke, was professional, detached, revealing nothing. "All done, Ranger." But the seed of recognition had been planted, and Marcus Chen's eyes never left her face. The cardiac monitor screamed at 2:06 a.m. Danielle was 3 floors up, charting in the surgical wing, when the overhead intercom crackled alive. "Code blue. Cardiac Bay 4. The words hit her spine like a defibrillator paddle. She was moving before her brain finished processing, feet on tile, muscle memory overriding protocol. Post-op floor. Mr. Harrison. 72 hours post-cardiac repair. The kind of patient whose body was a minefield of fresh sutures and compromised tissue. She hit the stairwell at a sprint, her worn combat boots drumming against concrete, the same boots that had crossed the Tigris River in 2009, the same boots that had walked through a Baghdad field hospital smelling of copper and diesel fuel. The emergency cart was already rolling down the hallway when she reached the 4th floor, but the resident pushing it had the look of someone drowning. Young. Panicked. The kind of doctor who'd never held someone's life in his hands while mortar rounds shook the walls. The on-call surgeon was 15 minutes out. Danielle knew this before anyone said it because she'd already calculated the distance from his house in the suburbs, factored in the speed of a man woken at 2:51 a.m., subtracted the probability he'd break every traffic law to get here. 15 minutes meant Harrison had maybe 4 before cardiac tamponade became cardiac arrest. The room was chaos wearing a surgical mask. The resident was barking orders that contradicted each other. A nurse was fumbling with the crash cart. The attending from the ICU stood frozen, waiting for the surgeon who wasn't here, wouldn't be here in time, was already too far away. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical dirge overhead. Danielle stepped into the room. Her voice dropped an octave. "Step back." It wasn't a request. It was a command that moved through the room like current through water. Residents moved. The attending blinked. She was already scanning Harrison's chest, distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds, the pale, clammy skin of a man whose pericardial sac was filling with blood that had nowhere to go. His blood pressure was 62/38 and falling. His oxygen saturation was trending toward the floor. She grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath from the crash cart. Alcohol swab. Her hands were steady in a way that made the resident's hands stop shaking just by proximity. There was a quality to the air when someone who'd been trained in a combat zone took control. The atmosphere itself seemed to compress, to hold its breath, to recognize that this person had already survived worse. She marked the insertion point between his ribs, 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. Same spot she'd done this 17 times in a forward operating base while rockets exploded outside a canvas tent. Same technique. Same 3-finger grip. The needle went in smooth and sure, and when the hiss of air escaped from the needle hub, that beautiful, terrible sound of pressure releasing, Harrison's oxygen saturation started climbing. 58, 62. 68, his blood pressure began to recover, creeping upward like a soldier pulling himself out of a crater. "Get me a tube and drainage kit." "Now," she said. Her voice sounded like someone else's, someone who'd given orders in places where hesitation meant caskets. Someone the room recognized as authority before her credentials were ever verified. The resident moved. The nurse moved. They moved because fear doesn't live in the same space as competence, and competence was radiating off her in waves. Blood drained into the collection chamber. Dark blood, under pressure, the evidence of a surgical repair that had bled into the wrong space. 200 milliliters. 240. The monitor slowed its screaming. Harrison's eyes fluttered open. His saturation climbed to 91. Stable. The surgeon arrived at 3:06 a.m. to a patient who was already past the worst of it, already breathing easy, already asking what happened. The resident was pale, hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. The attending was writing notes that didn't make sense because what he'd witnessed didn't fit into the categories his training had prepared him for. And Danielle was already stripping off her gloves, her jaw muscles tight in a way that suggested she was clamping down on something that wanted to come out. "Good work," the surgeon said. A man named Torres, decent enough, the kind who asked questions instead of assuming. "That was beyond your scope, but it was exactly right. He'd be dead in another minute without that." She nodded. "One word. Pressure. Stable. You nailed it." Torres was still studying her, the same way Marcus Chen had studied her 2 nights ago, like he was looking at a photograph that was developing in chemical solution, details resolving in real time. She could see him cataloging, the muscle memory, the voice that commanded without raising its volume, the hands that moved like they'd been trained by death itself. By 6 a.m., Harrison was in the cardiac ICU, stable, scheduled for observation. By 7 a.m., the overnight report had been filed. By 8 a.m., Dr. Whitfield was reading it in his office with the door closed, his coffee growing cold on his desk. He sat in the leather chair that cost more than most people's cars, processing what he was reading. Emergency pericardiocentesis. Performed at bedside. Without consulting the attending surgeon. Without waiting for him to arrive. The procedure that was supposed to be beyond a nurse's scope of practice, the kind of move that could end a license, had saved a patient's life in a way that no surgeon at St. Michael's would have managed any faster. The problem wasn't that Danielle had broken protocol. The problem was that she'd saved the patient so thoroughly, so completely, that the violation was going to be impossible to hide. Torres had already written it up. The resident had already filed a statement saying she'd been instrumental. The monitors had all documented her timeline. And more than that, the move suggested something that terrified Whitfield in a way he couldn't articulate. Danielle Ross knew exactly what she was doing. By 10 a.m., Whitfield was sitting across from Gerald Hutchins in the board president's office on the executive floor. The mahogany desk was the size of a small boat. The walls were lined with photos of Hutchins on golf courses, Pebble Beach, Torrey Pines, St. Andrews. The kind of man who'd learned long ago that money and old friendships could solve most problems. Whitfield slid the overnight report across the desk. "We have a problem." Hutchins read. His face didn't move, which meant he understood immediately. $600,000 in fraudulent billing codes across veterans' charts. 18 months of careful work. Coordinated with 3 other board members, 2 insurance adjusters, and a billing consultant who asked no questions. The scheme was elegant. Veterans arrived at St. Michael's with complex injuries. Treatments were coded at maximum billable rates under diagnostic codes that insurance companies paid without hesitation because anything military-related was categorized as a higher priority claim. The difference between the actual procedure cost and the inflated billing amount got buried in departmental overhead accounts. It was clean. It was working. It was being investigated by a nurse who had no reason to be asking about Marcus Chen's billing files except that she knew exactly why she was asking. This nurse performed a surgical procedure without authorization, Whitfield said. His voice carried the certainty of a man who'd already thought this through. She's also been requesting access to patient billing records. Specifically Chen's file. She's asking about insurance codes. Hutchins set the report down. How long has she been here? 6 months. 3 shifts a week. Very quiet. No complaints, no disciplinary issues. Whitfield leaned back. But she knows something. Or she's looking for something. Either way, she's a problem that needs to be contained. Hutchins reached for the phone. First call went to Patricia Mendez, the compliance officer who owed Hutchins a favor from a real estate deal that had been conveniently structured in his favor. Second call went to Randall Chen, no relation to the patient, a consultant from an outside firm who'd done audits before and had been receptive to selective findings. Third call went to a request that Danielle's nursing references be contacted immediately with carefully worded questions about stability issues and boundary violations. By noon, Danielle was in HR. The office was small, fluorescent lit, with the antiseptic smell of institutional furniture and the accumulated dread of 1,000 bad conversations. Her supervisor, Margaret Kim, a woman who'd always been decent to her, looked uncomfortable in a way that suggested this wasn't her decision. Administrative leave, Margaret said. Effective immediately. Pending investigation into practicing beyond the scope of your license during the code blue last night. Danielle's hands were on the arms of the chair. She didn't move them. She didn't ask questions. She knew exactly what this was. She'd seen it before in operations that went wrong, in moments when someone got too close to the truth and institutions moved to protect themselves. The only thing that surprised her was how fast Whitfield had moved. Am I being terminated? Her voice was flat. Neutral. The voice of someone who'd already accepted the worst possible outcome. Not yet. That depends on the investigation. Margaret slid a document across her desk. You'll be contacted in 5 business days with the results. Your badge will be deactivated at the end of this shift. You're not to discuss this with any staff members. Those are the terms of your administrative leave. Danielle read it. Legal language that said nothing and everything. The words practicing beyond scope, unauthorized surgical procedure, patient endangerment. All of it was technically true. All of it was also the only way a 72-year-old man was still breathing. She stood up. I need to return my badge. The walk from HR down to the security desk at the front entrance of St. Michael's took her past the coffee station where she'd spent 6 months learning the names of people who would forget hers. Past the supply closet where she'd caught her reflection 1,000 times and barely recognized herself. Past the nurse's station where the overnight shift was still charting, heads down, pretending not to see. Marcus Chen was waiting near the elevators. His wheelchair was angled toward the stairwell, his Army Ranger tattoo visible on his forearm, a scroll with a dagger through it, the kind of permanent reminder that some identities never wash off. His eyes tracked her movement. Not curious. Knowing. She didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge him. She just felt his presence the way a radar operator feels a target moving through airspace, constant and unavoidable. Her fingers brushed the pocket of her jacket where she kept the photograph, her unit from before Baghdad, before the combat medic training, before she understood that she was capable of things that scared people who'd only read about violence. Security deactivated her badge at the front desk. The scanner made a soft beep, the kind of sound that meant she was no longer part of the system. The door that had opened for her 6 months ago closed now without resistance. The lobby of St. Michael's Hospital continued operating exactly as it had before she arrived, because institutions are like that, they absorb people and continue as if they never were. From the second-floor mezzanine, Dr. Whitfield watched her leave. His arms were crossed. His expression was controlled. He was already planning the next move, confident that he'd contained the threat, confident that a nurse without credentials or authority couldn't touch what he'd built. The fraud ring would continue. The billing codes would stay clean. The money would keep flowing because nobody with power was looking carefully enough to see it. He had no idea what had just been set in motion. The phone call happened at 9:02 a.m., exactly as Whitfield planned it. He locked his office door, pulled up Gerald Hutchins' number, hospital board president, Wednesday golf partner, co-conspirator in the inflated veteran billing codes that had netted them both $43,000 across 6 months, and waited for him to pick up on the second ring. "We have a problem," Whitfield said without preamble. Hutchins' voice came back tight. "The nurse?" "She performed an emergency pericardiocentesis in the hallway. Surgical bypass of protocol. If that gets reviewed by credentialing, the whole system falls apart." Whitfield let that sit for a moment, let Hutchins do the math. The billing codes worked because they charged for procedures that never left the patient rooms. A hallway surgery meant witnesses, documentation, a paper trail that led directly to their conspiracy. "What are you thinking?" Hutchins asked. "Administrative leave. Investigation into practicing beyond scope. I write the complaint, you move it through the board by lunchtime. We create enough institutional friction that she either quits or becomes so damaged that anything she says later gets dismissed as a disgruntled employee with stability issues. That's aggressive. She's military. They respect rank and chain of command. Put her on administrative leave and she'll follow protocol instead of fighting it." He was already typing the complaint, carefully worded language that made her emergency intervention sound like reckless ambition rather than life-saving medicine. 12 paragraphs. 7 witnesses listed, all of them residents he'd already spoken to in the break room. All of them understood that their next rotation assignments depended on their testimony. By 11:52 a.m., the official notice appeared in Danielle's personnel file, pending investigation, practicing outside nursing scope. By noon, she was escorted from the hospital by human resources, her badge deactivated, her access to St. Michael's systems revoked. The woman who'd performed a combat medic procedure that saved a man's life was now suspended pending findings. But that wasn't enough for Whitfield. Not when everything was at stake. He made for more phone calls between noon and 2 p.m. The first went to Danielle's nursing school reference. He identified himself as a credentialing consultant and asked leading questions about whether she'd ever demonstrated concerning mental health patterns or instability under pressure. The reference, her adjunct instructor who'd taught her a decade ago, said nothing, but the tone of questioning planted seeds. The second call went to her previous hospital employer in San Antonio, same tactic, same careful framing. The third went to an outside consulting firm that specialized in credential verification. Whitfield knew the CEO, had referred 2 board members to him, and arranged a comprehensive review of her educational credentials, her licensing history, her continuing education credits. Find something, Whitfield didn't say, but the implication hung in the air like antiseptic. The fourth call was to a lawyer he kept on retainer, someone who defended hospital administrators in licensing disputes. "I need you to prepare a documentation file. This nurse performed a procedure beyond her scope, and when I placed her on leave, she began making what sound like paranoid statements." He was laying groundwork for the possibility that she'd make accusations about the billing fraud. If she did, he'd already have her marked as unreliable. Unwell. The kind of person whose testimony wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. By 3 a.m., Danielle sat alone in a booth at Danny's Diner, 2 blocks from St. Michael's Hospital, staring at nothing. The coffee in front of her had gone cold an hour ago, a thin film of grease slicking its surface. The fluorescent lights of the diner hummed with the kind of acoustic bleakness that only existed between midnight and dawn, that liminal space where the world felt abandoned. On the vinyl seat beside her sat a pair of worn combat boots. The leather was cracked in places, the soles worn thin enough that you could almost see through them to memory. They'd come through customs in her personnel bag marked as old footwear, held together by muscle memory and the weight of what they'd carried. She'd worn these boots on the night she pulled 3 soldiers from a burning Humvee in Baghdad, the night that earned her 2nd Silver Star. The laces were frayed. The insoles were long gone. But they were the only physical proof of her actual identity that she'd allowed herself to keep during 6 months of being just a nurse. She turned them over in her hands, the leather cool against her palms. The problem wasn't the investigation. The problem wasn't Whitfield or his carefully orchestrated conspiracy to bury her credibility. The problem was that the mission was failing. 14 missed calls from her commanding officer sat on her phone, each one a pressure point, each one a reminder that she'd been placed at St. Michael's to document a specific fraud ring involving veteran patients, and now she was being removed from access before she could build the complete case. 6 months of embedding, 6 months of keeping her mouth shut during humiliations, 6 months of watching Whitfield and Hutchins move money through inflated surgical codes, and it was all about to evaporate because a doctor got nervous about one hallway procedure. She could defend herself. She could tell the hospital exactly what she was doing there, that this investigation was retaliation for her discovering their scheme. But if she did that, the intelligence operation would collapse. Whitfield and Hutchins would lawyer up immediately, destroy documentation, call their contacts in the state health department and the billing oversight board. The fraud ring would scatter like dust. Her reflection stared back at her in the diner window, dark circles under eyes that hadn't blinked in what felt like days, jaw set in the same expression she'd maintained through every public humiliation, every insult, every moment she'd had to absorb Whitfield's contempt without reaction. The composure that had kept her alive in Baghdad now felt like a mask that had fused to her face. She lifted the coffee cup. Her hand trembled as she did, not from fear, but from the weight of it. From the impossible choice that had presented itself with absolute clarity somewhere around 2:33 a.m. when she'd stopped pretending she had options. The only path forward was disappearance. She would walk out of San Antonio before sunrise, return to the operational chain of command, accept that this mission had been compromised. Whitfield would win this battle. The fraud would continue for another 6 months until some other intelligence thread picked it up. Veterans would keep being overcharged. The money would keep flowing because she hadn't been able to see it through. She set down the cup and pulled the boots toward her, tucking them back into her duffel bag with the careful precision of someone packing for a move that felt final. At 3:48 a.m., she paid her check, cash, untraceable, and left the diner. The San Antonio night was cool, the kind of cool that happened just before dawn when the heat of the day finally released its grip on the pavement. She walked the 2 blocks back to St. Michael's slowly, deliberately, not as an employee returning to her shift but as a soldier conducting an exit operation. The lobby doors slid open at 7:15 a.m. The morning news was playing on the reception area television, volume low but persistent. A reporter stood outside a grey military facility, her expression grave. Authorities are actively searching for Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Marie Ross, a decorated combat medic with the Naval Special Warfare Command who disappeared from a classified operational assignment 6 months ago. The lobby froze. Her photograph filled the screen, dress uniform, ribbons arranged in rows like constellation maps, her face rendered in the kind of formal military portrait that belonged on missing persons posters and federal databases. The photograph showed a woman in an environment that had absolutely nothing to do with St. Michael's Hospital. Ross, who holds 3 Silver Stars and 2 Purple Hearts for actions in Baghdad, Kandahar, and Fallujah, was reportedly placed on administrative leave from her civilian cover position yesterday. The reporter paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of genuine concern. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of Master Chief Petty Officer Ross, authorities request that you contact this number immediately. The number appeared on the screen. Below it, missing. National security priority. 15 people turned from the television to stare at Danielle standing frozen by the hospital entrance in civilian clothes, her duffel bag still slung across her shoulder, the boots inside it like a secret that had just become international news. The elevator doors behind the reception desk opened. Marcus Chen rolled out in his wheelchair, no longer wearing a hospital gown but a borrowed pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt 3 sizes too large, a clarity in his eyes that hadn't existed before, the clarity of a man who'd just been given permission to stop pretending he didn't know the truth. He locked eyes with her across the crowded lobby, the distance between them maybe 30 feet but feeling like a canyon, and spoke one word with the precision of someone uttering a prayer. Nightingale 7. Her operational code name. The name only 12 people in the entire world possessed. The hospital security guard, nameplate reading J. Vasquez, Navy anchor tattoo visible on his forearm where his sleeve had ridden up, went absolutely rigid. Then his body snapped to attention like someone had run an electrical current through his spine. "That's Master Chief Petty Officer Ross," he announced to the gathering crowd, voice carrying military precision, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd served under the kind of command that made you stand like your spine was made of steel. 3 silver stars. 2 tours as a combat medic in Baghdad. Danielle didn't move. The trembling in her hands had stopped. The composure that had sustained her through 6 months of humiliation shifted into something else, something that had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for permission to emerge. Her voice, when she finally spoke, dropped an octave. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of this operation." Dr. Whitfield emerged from the administrative corridor 40 seconds later, his face the color of old concrete. The San Antonio news station's broadcast started like any other morning story. A missing persons alert. A decorated Master Chief Petty Officer unaccounted for during a classified assignment. The photograph filled the hospital lobby television screen, Danielle Ross in dress whites, medals cascading across her chest, hair pulled back military tight, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. The morning shift gathered. Night shift lingered. A resident pointed at the screen and said, "Wait, isn't that," but nobody finished the sentence. Marcus Chen wheeled himself out of the elevator at 6:41 a.m. His physical therapy had progressed faster than anyone predicted. The wheelchair was temporary now, muscle memory returning, his body remembering how to carry itself again. He crossed the lobby toward the nurse's station. Saw her. Saw the television. Locked eyes with Danielle across 30 feet of polished tile. "Nightingale 7, he said clearly. Not a question. A recognition. A code name spoken aloud for the first time in 6 months, the name that meant guardian angel in military communications, the call sign only 8 people on Earth knew she carried. The lobby went absolutely silent. The kind of quiet where you can hear fluorescent lights humming overhead like insects trapped in glass. Danielle didn't move. Didn't blink. But her jaw changed. Tightened. The moment between before and after compressed into something smaller than a breath. The Navy veteran working the security desk, name was Patterson, 22 years in the fleet, knew a combat medic when he saw one, snapped to attention. His posture shifted from slouch to ramrod in a single second. He stood beside Danielle and announced with the clarity of someone addressing a superior officer, Master Chief Petty Officer Ross. 3 silver stars. 2 tours as a combat medic in Baghdad. His voice carried the weight of military recognition, the kind of respect that doesn't come from titles but from scars. That was the trigger. The moment the cover story stopped being a story. A general walked through the hospital entrance 2 minutes later. Not the kind of entrance hospital visitors make. The kind where the air pressure changes. 2-star insignia on his shoulder, an aide carrying a folder the thickness of a small novel, security detail moving with the terrifying fluid precision of people trained to secure perimeters. His name was General Marcus Webb. He'd been monitoring the investigation for 6 months while Danielle worked the night shift, gathered evidence, documented the fraud scheme that connected Whitfield to board president Gerald Hutchins and 3 other hospital administrators, all funneling veteran medical claims through inflated billing codes worth $340,000 over 18 months. The general's voice carried like a command through an open channel. "I need everyone in this lobby to hear this clearly. Master Chief Ross was embedded at this facility as part of an active Department of Defense investigation into systematic fraud targeting veteran patients. During her time here, despite facing workplace hostility and professional sabotage, she maintained her cover long enough to document evidence of criminal conspiracy involving hospital leadership and administrative staff." Dr. Jonathan Whitfield emerged from the administrative corridor 40 seconds later, his face the color of old concrete. He'd been called to an early morning meeting with the CEO. He'd expected an apology. He'd expected to discuss how quickly Danielle Ross would be terminated, her credentials questioned, her mission failed. Instead, he stepped into a lobby filled with news cameras, federal agents, and a 2-star general holding his case file like a deck of charges. The CEO was already backing away. "Dr. Whitfield, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security, please escort him from the building." But the general wasn't finished. He opened the second folder and read with the precision of someone reading criminal indictments. Master Chief Ross documented 43 lives saved during combat medical operations in Baghdad. 43. In this hospital, she saved the life of a cardiac tamponade patient using emergency pericardiocentesis when the on-call surgeon was 15 minutes out. She used technique and judgment that required training most RNs don't receive. And instead of being commended, she was placed on administrative leave and investigated for practicing beyond her scope. He paused. Let that settle. Because Dr. Whitfield wanted her removed before she could testify. Whitfield's face flashed white to red. Rage and panic moving through him like electrical current. "You can't do this. This is a civilian hospital. I don't report to." "You reported to the board," the CEO said. "And the board is about to be very busy with federal agents." He nodded toward the administrative wing where FBI personnel emerged, moving toward board President Hutchins, who'd been trying to edge toward the stairwell. They intercepted him with the kind of calm professionalism that meant his day was about to change fundamentally. Local news cameras captured everything. Whitfield's face twisted in fury and panic. Hutchins being detained. The general reading investigation summaries while hospital staff stood frozen in stunned silence. A resident who'd witnessed the chart-throwing incident 6 months ago stared at Whitfield with something that looked like dawning revulsion, the kind that comes from understanding what you'd ignored. Whitfield turned on Danielle, jabbing a finger toward her like a weapon. "You lied. You've been lying this whole time. Your credentials, your background, everything was false." "My credentials are real," she said quietly. Her voice had changed. Dropped an octave. "No, please. No apology. Just statement. I'm a licensed RN with 8 years of bedside experience. I'm also a Master Chief Petty Officer with 12 years of military medical training. Both things are true. You assumed they couldn't exist in the same person. That was your mistake." Marcus Chen wheeled forward. His movements were getting stronger every day, his body remembering itself. "You tried to destroy a woman who saved my life. Who saved 43 lives. Because she made you feel small." He said it simply. Not angry. Just fact. That's the part that breaks me. Someone's phone showed the security footage from 6 months ago. The cafeteria incident. Whitfield knocking her lunch tray to the floor. The audio crystal clear, pick that up, sweetheart. The chart on the ground. Her hands gathering papers without trembling. A nurse standing nearby said softly, "I watched that happen. I was standing right there. And I did nothing." The state medical board representative arrived with the general. She announced Whitfield's license suspension in 2 sentences. Effective immediately. Criminal charges pending for fraud, conspiracy, and filing false reports to obstruct an investigation. His hospital privileges revoked. Everything he'd built on the assumption that rank meant power, that credentials meant untouchability, collapsing like a structure that had lost its foundation. Security escorted him out past a gauntlet of staff members. Some filmed on their phones. Some just stared. One nurse, a woman he'd humiliated 3 years ago for her inadequate charting skills, watched with tears on her face. Not sadness. Relief. The thing that happens when a burden you didn't know you were carrying finally lifts. His car left the parking lot at 7:14 a.m. News vans were still arriving, satellite trucks pulling in with logos on their sides. By the time the morning news cycle hit national syndication, Dr. Jonathan Whitfield's entire life had compressed into 20 minutes of video footage that would follow him forever. 6 months later. A community college classroom in a strip mall outside San Antonio, the kind of place where fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead and the air smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Dr. Jonathan Whitfield, no longer doctor, just Jonathan, demonstrated chest compressions on a CPR dummy for a class of 12 students. His hands moved through the motions with mechanical precision. Push hard, push fast. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. He made minimum wage plus whatever commission the college paid per certification completed. His medical license remained revoked. His malpractice insurance had been cancelled. The fraud trial was pending. His house sold to cover legal fees. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with beige walls and a mattress on the floor and the kind of silence that comes from having nobody to call. One student raised a hand. "Did you ever work in a real hospital?" Whitfield didn't answer. Just continued the compression sequence on the dummy. Push. 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 The kind of repetitive motion that fills time without filling anything else. Meanwhile, at St. Michael's Hospital, Danielle Ross stood in a closed ceremony, no press, no cameras, just military brass and the hospital CEO who'd personally apologized 17 times and meant it less each time. The fraud investigation led to 11 arrests. Recovery of $1.2 million in fraudulent billing. Systemic reforms in veteran medical billing oversight across 4 states. Her commendation came on official Department of Defense letterhead, signed by the Secretary of the Navy, acknowledging service rendered above and beyond scope, sacrifices unrecognized, cover maintained under hostile conditions. Marcus Chen stood without a wheelchair now, muscle memory fully restored, speaking at a VA hospital in Houston about the medic who saved him twice. Once in Baghdad under mortar fire. Once in San Antonio when his chart had almost cost him his life. The audience, mostly veterans, some still carrying visible scars, some carrying the kind you can't see, listened with the kind of attention you give to stories that matter. The worn combat boots sat in a shadow box on Danielle's wall, finally retired after 20 years of service, mounted beside the flag she'd earned the right to carry. 43 names embroidered on the inside lining, one for each life. The flag folded the way the military folds flags, sharp angles, precise creases, geometric geometry that speaks of respect. She returned to St. Michael's as lead trauma nurse, promoted past the residency level she'd been investigating, training new residents in emergency procedures with the same quiet competence. The institutional memory stayed with her, every patient saved, every procedure executed, every detail that mattered. A new nurse, young and nervous, dropped a supply tray in the hallway during the morning rush. The sound of plastic containers bouncing off tile. An attending physician started to make a comment, something dismissive, something designed to shame. Danielle stepped between them with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. "I've got it," she said, and helped the nurse pick up the supplies, her hand steady, her message clear. The attending physician understood without words being spoken. This was how this hospital would work now. In the break room, someone had taped a printed quote to the bulletin board, "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most." No one knew who'd put it there, but everyone knew who it was about. The quote stayed up. No one took it down. Danielle walked the night shift hallways, the hospital quiet, the rhythm of her footsteps matching the rhythm of the life support equipment humming in patient rooms. Her reflection appeared in a window, not a woman haunted by what she'd survived, but a woman still serving, still saving, still standing. Still here. If you've made it this far in a story about a woman no one expected, a system that tried to break her, and the power of staying quiet until the moment it matters to speak, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because these stories matter. The ones about hidden strength. The ones about people who served twice and never told anyone. The ones about the quietest person in the room being the one holding it all together. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value? What would you have done in Danielle's position?